The royal summit was meant to calm a crisis, not expose one. But behind closed palace doors, a single defense from King Charles changed the temperature of the room. William did not shout. He did not plead. He simply pushed back his chair, looked at his father, and walked out, leaving silence, humiliation, and a monarchy suddenly divided in full view of its own inner circle. Before we go deeper into what this really means for the royal family, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss a single update. Charles entered that Windsor meeting believing he was protecting more than Camilla. He believed he was protecting the crown itself, the symbol of royal authority that depends on discipline, loyalty, and the appearance of unity, even when private emotions are burning underneath. William entered with something colder than anger. The prince carried the weight of Catherine's hurt, the quiet concern around his children, and the future image of a monarchy he would one day inherit. A royal summit, in plain terms, is a private, high-level family and household meeting where senior royals and trusted advisors settle a crisis before it reaches the public. But this one did not settle anything. It exposed the wound. A senior aide opened the briefing paper and read Camilla's controversial remarks into the room, each word landing harder than the last. She sat still, guarded but tense, as though she knew the room was no longer discussing language but loyalty. William's face changed before anyone spoke. His jaw tightened. His eyes stayed fixed on the paper. Then Charles, with the calm voice of a man trying to control the entire room, said Camilla had been misunderstood. That was the moment the air shifted. Several aides had expected the king to soften his wife's words, perhaps even acknowledge that Catherine had been hurt by them. Instead, he defended the queen consort in front of the future king, and William heard not explanation, but dismissal. Camilla looked toward Charles, relieved for a heartbeat, but that relief disappeared when she saw William's expression harden. The prince did not erupt. He did not throw accusations across the table. He simply asked whether defending the remark mattered more than recognizing the pain it had caused. Charles paused, and in that pause the whole room understood the danger. The monarch chose protection over correction. William chose silence over surrender. His chair scraped back with a sound no one in that room would forget. Charles watched his son rise. Camilla lowered her eyes. The aides froze. Then William walked out, not as a wounded child leaving his father, but as an heir declaring a boundary the palace had ignored for too long. But to understand why William's silence turned into an exit, the story must move from the room itself to the people whose wounds were already waiting there. This was never only about one sentence, one meeting, or one argument. It was about Charles trying to keep peace, Camilla trying to defend her place, William protecting the family he believes he must one day lead, and Catherine standing just beyond the room as the person whose dignity had become part of the dispute. Every face carried history. Every pause carried pain. Charles believed he was holding the family together, but the harder he tried to protect Camilla, the more he exposed the distance growing between himself and William. For the king, unity around the queen consort was not just personal loyalty. It was survival. After years of judgment, whispers, public discomfort, and private sacrifice, he felt that allowing Camilla to be challenged too sharply would make the monarchy look divided at the very moment it needed discipline. Yet William saw the same situation through a very different lens. To him, those remarks were not careless words that could be polished away by palace language. They felt like a warning from the past, a sign that old resentments were still being allowed to shape the future crown. The prince wanted to respect his father. He wanted to believe Charles would understand the pain beneath the argument. But each defense of Camilla sounded to William like another dismissal of Catherine, and silence began to feel like betrayal. Camilla, meanwhile, felt trapped in a storm that seemed to follow her no matter how carefully she stood beside the monarch. Every criticism of her words felt, to her, like a deeper rejection of her place in his life and in the royal story. She had fought too long to be accepted, And now one remark had dragged every old wound back into the room. That was why the hours before the summit carried such heavy tension. Catherine had not asked William to make a scene. She had not demanded revenge or punishment. She simply looked at him before he left and said, "Do not fight for me. Fight for what is right." He said nothing. He only closed his hand around the file, and that silence told her he had already made a decision inside himself. Charles had also been warned. A trusted advisor had told him privately that defending Camilla too strongly could push William further away. But the monarch chose loyalty to his wife over caution. He believed he could control the room. He believed his son would stay seated. He believed the family would absorb the discomfort as it always had. But beneath the surface, the real pressure was not coming from the summit itself. It was coming from something that had happened earlier, something sharper, more personal, and impossible to forget. And that earlier incident was the moment everyone inside the palace later remembered as the spark that made the walkout almost inevitable. The palace did not fracture in a single afternoon. The crack began days earlier, during a private reception at Clarence's house, when Camilla made a remark that landed with the force of a challenge. To outsiders, it may have sounded like courtly frustration. Inside the royal family, it struck something deeper: loyalty, respect, succession, and Catherine's place in the future crown. Clarence's house, the royal residence long tied to Charles and Camilla's private life, had become the unlikely starting point of a storm no one could quietly contain. The conversation that night had begun with familiar restraint. Guests spoke of duty, appearances, public affection, and the changing face of the monarchy. But when Catherine's growing influence was raised, when her calm popularity and William's modern approach were praised too openly, Camilla's frustration slipped through the polished surface. She said the monarchy should not be guided by sentimental popularity. And the words did not fade after they were spoken. They traveled. They moved from one listener to another, with the force of something everyone understood, but no one wanted to repeat too loudly. Camilla may have believed she was defending tradition, but those who heard her felt something sharper beneath it. Catherine was not named, yet Catherine was present in every syllable. William was not attacked directly, yet William's future vision was clearly in the line of fire. By the next day, the remark had reached the royal household, and the silence around it became more dangerous than the sentence itself. Catherine heard it from a senior aide in a private account prepared for the prince, and she did not react with outrage. That would have been easier. Instead, she became still, wounded, in the way a person is wounded when an old suspicion is finally given words. She understood what it meant. Her place, her service, her public trust, all of it had been reduced by someone close to the throne into something soft, shallow, and sentimental. When William later heard the same words, he asked the aide to say them again, not because he had misunderstood, but because he needed to feel the full weight of what had been allowed to happen. Then he placed his glass down and did not drink from it. That evening, the prince sat with Catherine after dinner, the briefing note between them like proof of a deeper fracture, and his voice dropped as he said, "This cannot become normal." She looked at him with quiet pain, knowing that if he challenged it, the cost would be personal. Charles already knew about the Clarence House comment before the summit was called. The king understood the danger, yet he chose not to ask Camilla for a private apology. He believed the room could be managed, the hurt contained, the words softened by authority. But by the time William entered Windsor, he was not seeking drama. He was seeking accountability. And Charles was preparing to refuse it. That refusal finally came inside the summit room, where restraint gave way to confrontation, and the heir faced the king not as a son, but as a warning. The room did not explode all at once. It tightened. Aides stopped moving. Papers remained untouched. Charles sat at the head of the table, Camilla close beside him, while William waited for one sentence that never came. He wanted acknowledgement. He wanted restraint. Instead, he heard defense. And in that instant, the summit stopped being about damage control and became a test of power. Charles began with the calm authority of a monarch who believed order could still be restored. Household advisors laid out the danger in careful language, warning that Camilla's remarks had created a private wound and a public risk. A unified response, they said, would protect the family from deeper damage. A royal household, in simple terms, is the private team of aides and officials who help senior royals manage duties, statements, schedules, and crises. But no team could soften what was sitting between father and son. William listened without interrupting, yet his silence was not agreement. It was pressure building. Charles then framed the matter as unfair pressure on Camilla, saying the family must not turn inward, while outside voices were already circling. The king believed he was shielding his wife from another wave of judgment. Camilla heard protection in his words and held on to it, but William heard something else entirely. He heard the old pattern returning, the same palace instinct to protect rank before truth. The prince spoke carefully, almost too calmly, and that made the room even more uneasy. He said the issue was not public pressure, it was private responsibility. It was not about punishing Camilla. It was about admitting that Catherine had been wounded by words that should never have been treated as harmless. Camilla's composure finally cracked. She told William she had spent years being judged, years being treated as though she would never truly belong, and she would not sit there while every sentence she spoke became proof against her. Her pain was real, but so was his. William leaned forward, tapped the briefing paper once with his finger, and looked straight at Charles. Then came the question that changed everything. He asked whether the king believed Catherine deserved those words. No aide moved. No one rescued the moment. Charles paused, and the pause became its own answer before he even spoke. At last, the monarch said Camilla's meaning had been twisted, that frustration had been turned into accusation, that the family should not feed the storm. But to William, that was not correction. It was defense. Camilla looked relieved for a second, then uneasy, because she could feel the consequence arriving before anyone named it. William's face changed. Whatever hope remained drained from the room. He pushed his chair back, and the sound cut through the silence like a verdict. Charles watched his son rise, still believing perhaps that the prince might stop. But William had made his decision. He walked out before anyone could turn the moment into another palace compromise. But the walkout was only the visible rupture. Beneath it sat a deeper question of who now held moral control over the monarchy's future. Power inside a palace rarely announces itself with raised voices. It moves through seating plans, briefing notes, pauses, permissions, and the person a monarch chooses to defend when everyone else is waiting for correction. In that summit, Charles still held the crown. But William held something different, the future. And when the future walked out, the balance inside the monarchy shifted. For a few seconds after the door closed, no one seemed willing to accept what had just happened. Charles remained at the head of the table, still the king, still the man with the final word, yet the silence around him no longer felt obedient. The crown, in simple terms, means the authority and public role carried by the monarch, not just the person wearing it. Charles had that authority by birth, by duty, and by law, but William's exit carried another kind of power, the emotional power of the heir refusing to bless a decision he believed was wrong. Senior courtiers understood the danger immediately. Families argue. Palaces survive disagreements. But a visible split between father and son over Camilla was different, because it struck at the confidence of the people who keep the royal machine moving. Charles felt the sting of betrayal. To him, William had challenged not only his judgment, but his dignity in front of advisors who were supposed to witness control, not collapse. Yet William felt something colder outside that room. He felt abandoned. His father had heard the hurt, understood the warning, and still chose to defend the remark rather than confront it. Camilla sat beside Charles with the strange pain of someone protected and exposed at the same time. The king's defense had shielded her position, but it had also made her the center of a deeper isolation. She could not celebrate loyalty that had just driven William out. Charles set his pen down after the door closed. He did not follow his son. He did not call him back. Instead, he told the room to continue. But no one spoke at first, because everyone knew the meeting had already changed shape. The prepared palace statement suddenly looked useless. One senior aide quietly removed a softer draft from the folder, because after William's walkout, any gentle denial would feel like fiction. A palace statement is the official wording released to explain or contain a royal matter, and this one could no longer pretend the summit had been calm. Outside the room, William did not return to his office. He moved away from the formal corridors and made one phone call, short and controlled, but heavy with consequence. He told Catherine what had happened without decorating the truth. He had left. And once that call was made, the private fracture inside Windsor began moving through the royal household with frightening speed. A royal walkout is not just a gesture, it is a signal. Within minutes, phones began lighting up, aides began rewriting statements, and private secretaries began asking who had seen what. The palace wanted containment. William wanted clarity. Charles wanted loyalty. Camilla wanted the room to stop looking at her as though she had become the reason father and son could no longer speak. The shock did not stay inside the summit room for long. It moved through Windsor, like a warning no one dared say too loudly. The royal household moved fast, because when a private meeting collapses, the first battle is always over control. A private secretary, in simple terms, is a senior aide who manages a royal figure's official duties, messages, and sensitive communications. Those aides knew the danger immediately. If William's departure became the story, then Camilla's remarks would no longer be the only issue. The story would become Charles losing his son at the table. William's staff received instructions not to comment, but the order already felt weak. Too many people had seen the prince leave. Too many had heard the chair scrape back. Silence could slow the damage, but it could not erase the moment. Charles remained inside the palace machinery, carrying the humiliation of a monarch left seated by his own heir. He felt the sting privately, but he refused to call William back at once, because calling him too quickly would look like surrender, and waiting too long would look like distance. That was the trap. Camilla felt it too. She left the formal pressure of the meeting and withdrew to a smaller sitting room, shaken by the cruel truth that Charles's defense had not ended anything. It had protected her for one moment and isolated her in the next. The queen consort had wanted loyalty, but now loyalty had turned into a wound. Meanwhile, William stood away from the noise and made the call that mattered most. Catherine answered, already sensing from his silence that something had broken. He did not explain every word. He did not dress the truth in palace language. He simply said, "I left." Catherine closed her eyes and absorbed the weight of it, because she knew what that meant. Her husband had not just walked away from a meeting. He had crossed a line with his father, and once crossed, that line could never fully disappear. Inside the communications office, the first draft of the palace response was quietly changed. Camilla's name was removed, not out of mercy, but because aides now understood her remarks were too dangerous to defend directly. The crisis had shifted from wording to trust, from reputation to family, from private hurt to royal consequence. And as the household tried to contain the damage, everyone sensed the next moment coming: a private encounter no secretary could manage, no statement could soften, and no advisor could enter. Because after the summit collapsed, the next turning point did not happen in a formal room, it happened in private, between two people with nowhere left to hide. When Charles finally went to William, there were no aides carrying folders, no courtiers arranging language, and no polished palace phrasing to soften the damage. There was only a father, a son, and the silence left behind by a chair pushed back too hard. For the first time that day, the monarchy disappeared. What remained was family wounded, proud, and unable to pretend. Charles did not summon William with the cold force of a king. He asked to see him, and that difference mattered. A royal command would have made the meeting about authority, but this was something more fragile. The monarch needed to recover control of a moment that had slipped from his hands, yet the father needed to know whether his son had walked away from the summit or from him. William agreed only after speaking with Catherine, and even then, the decision cost him. She had heard his pain through the phone, and she knew anger could become a wall if it was left untouched for too long. Catherine told him not to let one broken meeting become the final word between father and son. So the prince went, not softened, not defeated, but steady. Charles stood near the mantel when William entered, and William remained close to the door, as if some part of him refused to fully step back into the world he had just left. Neither man sat. The silence did the first speaking. Then Charles said quietly, "You made your point." Those words carried pride, hurt, and warning all at once. William did not take them as victory. He took them as proof that his father still saw the walkout as a challenge before he saw it as pain. Charles told him that defending Camilla was never meant to diminish Catherine, never meant to turn a careless remark into a family wound. But William answered with the kind of calm that cuts deeper than anger. He said, intention was not enough. The effect mattered. The damage mattered. The message sent to Catherine mattered. The future king could not build a modern crown on silence simply because truth made the room uncomfortable. Charles heard the accusation beneath the restraint, and for once he did not interrupt. William's pain became visible then, not loud, not theatrical, but unmistakable. He was not trying to punish Camilla. He was trying to protect a standard. He was trying to make his father understand that loyalty without accountability was not unity. It was avoidance wearing a crown. Charles did not apologize for defending the queen consort, and William knew that full surrender would not come. But the king finally agreed that the palace response had to acknowledge real hurt, not hide behind careful wording. It was not healing, it was not peace, but it was the first crack in the wall. And that partial concession became the turning point, because once the story reached the outside world, the public would see something far bigger than a family disagreement. By the next morning, the private pain inside Windsor had become a public symbol, and Britain began choosing what the walkout meant. By dawn, the palace could no longer treat the summit as an internal matter. The story had escaped the walls, and the image was devastatingly simple. William walking away, while Charles defended Camilla. No photograph was needed. The public could picture it. A sun rising, a father staying seated, a queen consort at the center of a storm she could no longer control. The palace response arrived with careful words, but careful words could not hide the damage. It confirmed that a private family discussion had taken place, and acknowledged hurt caused by recent remarks, while avoiding direct blame with the kind of caution that made the silence even louder. To ordinary viewers, that phrase sounded small. Inside royal circles, it was huge. A palace response, in simple terms, is the official public message released to shape how people understand a royal crisis, and this one admitted just enough to prove that something serious had happened. Broadcasters seized on the meaning immediately. Morning panels framed the walkout as more than a family disagreement. They called it a generational clash, a struggle between Charles's instinct to protect Camilla and William's determination to protect the future monarchy from old habits of denial. The country split almost at once. Supporters of the king saw the prince's exit as disrespectful, a son embarrassing his father when unity mattered most. Supporters of William saw something different. They saw the first honest act in a room full of avoidance, a refusal to sit quietly while Catherine's dignity was treated as something negotiable. Camilla watched the coverage privately, and the criticism cut deeper than she expected. She had endured public judgment before, but this was different because she was no longer facing the crowd alone. She had become the dividing line between monarch and heir. Charles had defended her, yet that defense now looked like the very reason the crisis had exploded. By mid-morning, one London newspaper captured the national mood with a stark front page showing 2 empty chairs beneath the headline, "The Summit That Split the Crown." It was simple. It was brutal. It turned a private sound William's chair, scraping back into a public symbol. Outside Buckingham Palace, a small crowd gathered near the gates, not in chaos, but in tense curiosity. A broadcaster asked one woman what the moment meant, and she answered, "He walked out because someone finally had to." That single sentence carried the force of public judgment. Charles could not dismiss it as gossip. Camilla could not escape what it revealed. William's action had become bigger than anger, bigger than one remark, bigger than one wounded meeting. It had become a verdict on leadership, and the king had no choice but to understand that the country was not only watching the monarchy, it was measuring its conscience. And when the noise finally settled, what remained was not gossip, not spectacle, but the unmistakable meaning of a son refusing to inherit silence. In the end, the walkout did not destroy the monarchy. It exposed what the monarchy could no longer hide. Charles had defended the woman he loved. William had defended the standard he believed the crown must meet. Camilla had learned that protection can become isolation. Catherine had become the quiet center of a crisis she never asked to lead. And the institution was forced to choose honesty over silence. Charles understood, by the time the final palace statement was prepared, that this could no longer be treated as a small family disagreement. The wording landed with deliberate weight, acknowledging that Camilla's remarks had caused pain and that future family discussions would be handled with greater care. A palace statement, in simple terms, is the official message released to explain the monarchy's position during a sensitive moment. And this one mattered, because it did not pretend the wound was imaginary. It did not cast the queen consort aside, but it also did not shield her completely. That was the change. The king remained the monarch, still carrying the authority of the throne. Yet the summit had made one truth impossible to ignore. William's voice now carried unavoidable power inside the royal household. The prince had not taken the crown, but he had shown the family what the future crown would accept and what it would reject. Charles had to face the painful truth that defending Camilla without first acknowledging hurt had weakened him, not because he loved her, but because love without responsibility had made the room colder. William also had to accept the cost of his own decision. Walking out had created pain. It had wounded his father, unsettled the household, and turned a private fracture into a public symbol. But it had also forced truth into a place where silence had survived for too long. Camilla was not erased from the royal story, yet she was no longer protected from the consequence of her words. Catherine did not demand revenge, did not step forward to claim victory, and did not turn the crisis into a personal triumph. She was quietly vindicated because dignity had finally been defended without cruelty. When William returned home, he placed the summit file on a table and said only, "It is done." Catherine took his hand in silence, and in that silence there was no celebration, only the heavy relief of a line finally drawn. The monarchy's strength was not in pretending every face was smiling behind closed doors. Its strength was in admitting that unity without accountability had become impossible. The walkout became a defining moment because it proved the future crown would not be built on avoidance, inherited wounds, or unquestioned loyalty. It would have to be built on honesty, even when honesty hurt the people closest to the throne. The summit ended with a door closing, but its true legacy was clear. From that day forward, silence no longer ruled the royal family. Thanks for watching. Please don't forget to like and subscribe, and we will see you in next one.